Welcome to Seeking Numina. I'm your host, Elyse Wells, and I invite you to connect with the sacred wild within and around you through Numina, or sacred sites around the world, and the wisdom they hold. Together, let's remember the old ways, build relationships with land spirits, and dare to reach out to the fairies. The sacred wild is inviting you to dance in the moonlight. Will you answer their call? Welcome to episode 2 of the Seeking Numina podcast, where we're going to be talking about what spirit-led travel really is and the different ways that it might manifest itself on your spiritual path. Spirit-led travel is being led by spirit. And there are many different ways spirit can make itself known. Sometimes you'll see this term specifically in reference to Christians and being called to pilgrimage, but it is certainly not only in reference to that specific spiritual path. Spirit-led to me means when the calling to visit somewhere comes from outside of myself. So I'll share some different examples of when that has happened for me. As I shared in episode 1, it was really the way nature made itself known to me that gave me the space to hear spirit call me to Greece. And that is what I would encourage you. If you want to be led by spirit more in your life, spending more time in nature, embracing the sacred wild, looking for opportunities to connect with it is going to be the ticket to doing that. So spirit-led travel is simply following the guidance of spirit to travel where you're meant to go. And it's going to also, spirit-led travel is going to also be something that is in flux at like many spiritual things that you're going to do in your life. So the first time I was called to spirit, the first time I was consciously aware that it was spirit calling me somewhere, because I'm sure you've had experiences where later on you realize there was something a little bit special or deep or different about that experience. It's the same way with spirit-led travel, where it's not always going to feel like the same thing, but once you commit yourself to it, there are signs that you pick up on quicker. My intuition that it was spirit calling me to a place was really clear the first time I was called by a deity to a particular place. So maybe let's talk about that first. What are the different types of spirits that might call you to a place? One is a god or goddess that specifically works with that land or is known to be in existence in that land. And I will share an example of that. Another is the land itself. Land spirits call in the people who can most listen to them, people who are ready to acknowledge the wisdom that they hold. So Greece, for example, is a place that is very spiritually alive. And I've been so fortunate to meet dozens of people on my spiritual pilgrimages that I run, either in day retreats, personal tours, or in group retreats. I get to share the wisdom of the land of Greece, but even more than that, I get to learn how the land called them there. And sometimes it's a particular deity known to be worshipped here in Greece. I've taken Artemis devotees to her temple. I've been able to hold hands with a Gardnerian high priestess as we looked at Persephone's well in Elyse. And I've experienced through these experiences what it's like in others to be spirit-led as well. And it does often start way before it can happen. So even if you are somebody who feels like travel is out of the realm of possibility for you, but you have this spiritual calling to travel somewhere, you feel a tug to be pulled towards something somewhere else, don't push it aside. Don't ignore it. Don't think, oh, this can't be for me, because when we allow ourselves to hear our intuition and really take it in and really notice it's there and really maybe journaling it, showing up at the altar, asking questions about it, inviting yourself to think about the guidance you're being given, that's when our intuition feels seen. And so it continues to work. And if it's a spirit calling you, whether that be a deity or a land spirit, you're going to have a better experience when you do that spirit-led travel because of the deity or because of the ways that you're connecting to your intuition. So your intuition is really, I'm being kind of guided to say, it is an extension of the ego, because the ego is there to protect us. The ego is there to be the barrier between us and the outside world. It's the filter that takes things in and says, nope, we don't need that. Yes, we do need that. Oh, this is how that affects me. And our intuition is sort of the same thing. It gives more guidance. It has sometimes more clarity, sometimes less clarity than the ego. But what intuition does that acts similar to the ego is it protects us. So our intuition pushes us out of our comfort zone sometimes. It encourages us to do things that we may have in the past said we can't do or we shouldn't do, or, okay, I'll do it, but I won't talk about it. I won't share that with others. Intuition asks us to share it, asks us to do it, asks us to try it. And in that way, it's like the ego in the reverse, because the ego often tells us, no, don't do that because it's not safe, it's not comfortable. But both the ego and intuition work together in a bit of a yin-yang situation. You'll notice in almost everything we explore in this podcast, when we talk about the ways spirits interact with us, or we talk about how we can connect to a sacred place, or we talk to specific sacred places, you'll notice that there's always a harmony and a balance being sought. And intuition and ego kind of form that balance in this scenario when we're talking about how to really start listening to spirit when they want to lead us. So we've got a few things going on here, right? We have deities that could call us to a place that they're worshipped for us to deepen our work with them. We have land itself calling us there for a lesson that can be learned. We also have the call of our own ancestors. If ancestor work is important to you, or if you're just beginning your work with ancestors and you know it's going to be important for you, maybe you're being called to visit those ancestral lands. And ancestors are not just your blood relatives. They're also not just the genealogy. You know, we have members of our family that aren't blood related. Maybe it's a neighbor who's become like a sister to you. Maybe it is a teacher that you had growing up who remains such an important part of your life. Maybe it's somebody who took in your mom when she was growing up, and you wouldn't be here today without that person doing what they did. So when you think about places that your ancestors lived, I want you to think broader and think about the ancestors of the life you're living and how that is calling to you. I also would say on the reverse side, if you're being called by a deity and you don't have ancestral ties to that land you're being called to, that doesn't mean you're not supposed to go either. So ancestors often sort of gets the first dibs when we think of travel. We think, okay, I want to go where my ancestors are from, and that makes sense, but it might be deeper than it appears at first. So let yourself be guided, and then let the logic brain come in later and figure out why later, maybe even on the trip, maybe even while you're integrating after the trip. Another type of ancestor, well, another type of spirit that could guide you is your spirit guide. Your spirit guide, if you are in a close relationship with them, if you've really gotten to know them, they may reveal something about themselves that it could benefit you to travel to where they last lived on Earth. So for example, my spirit guide, I haven't talked about her at length on the Magic Kitchen podcast, mostly because it hasn't been the right time, but I have done workshops and I've shared more about our relationship in my Walking with Spirit Guides workshop. But my spirit guide has revealed to me that the last life she lived on Earth was around 800-ish AD, and she was a Mayan priestess. And that was very interesting information for me because I am not overly drawn to South American magical practices, spiritual practices, or even cultural practices. It's never been something that I was obsessed with as a kid or anything like that. So it felt like authentic information as well, because it wasn't something I would have imposed on her. You know, sometimes we worry that when we get these downloads or these messages that we're making them come through the way we want them to. But this definitely felt, you know, outside of myself because it wasn't something I could relate to. So it's not the time yet. I feel that strongly, but I do know that at some point I will be guided to the lands that she lived on and the plants that she worked with, and maybe even somebody in her lineage. That kind of gives me goosebumps. Maybe I could even work with a priestess that she is in the same lineage as on this plane, having only worked with her on that plane. I mean, that seems like it would be such a gift. So if you are really in the relationships, if you're building your relationships with your spirit guides, asking questions like that might give you answers for why you're being spirit led somewhere. Another layered, sort of complicated way that type of spirit that might be leading you to travel somewhere is actually your past lives. A very good friend of mine was called to Greece, quite unsure of why at the time. And as she was here, she realized kind of quickly that she had lived a lot of lifetimes as a priestess here. And being a priestess in Greece was really different. Oh, maybe that's an episode that I need to do. But when we talk about ancient priestesses, you know, we picture them as, you know, being more free or being very open to spirit and getting the chance to work with that god or goddess in depth. But actually, it got pretty bureaucratic by the end, very aristocratic. It was very class-based. It was very race-based. And it was also patriarchal. The priestesses did not have power and control in their temples by the end. By the time we see Abrahamic religions really rising, priestesses, for the most part, have lost a lot of their standing in society already, or they had it, but in a very performative way, with men being in control of the main things behind the scenes. So she tapped into a lot of that, and now she's doing quite a lot of collective healing through the priestess lineage by acknowledging some of these things that she experienced in past lives. And only the land could show her that. Only physically visiting those places could expand her understanding of her path in this life. And it was really powerful to witness when she was traveling here in Greece. We got to do quite a lot of exploration together. But I will say, most of the time, when you're spirit led, it's going to be by a deity or by the land itself, or by your own ancestral research. And that's not to say that while you're researching ancestors, if you feel like you got the idea to go to Ireland, that doesn't mean it wasn't also spirit led, because you were led on that journey to exploring your ancestry by spirit as well, especially if that's the whole point for you, is it's a spiritual connection to the ancestors that you want to honor through that travel. So I wanted to share an experience of a deity calling me, because I think we hear a lot about ancestral travel, like traveling to the lands that we were originally from, or that our families were originally from, but we don't often get the conversation on what it's like to be called by the spirits who want to work with us to that place. And that tends to be the way I travel. So I had a very beautiful experience, and I've shared it a bit on the Magic Kitchen. Now, this was March of 2023. And I was really struggling to get Seeking Numina off the ground. I was having trouble getting traction on social media. I was having trouble getting people to come to workshops or learn with me in other capacities. And it just was starting to feel like maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was on the wrong path all along. And that's a really scary place to be in. Anybody who's had self-doubt to the level of thinking I was wrong all along, you know, it spirals into regret really fast and into confusion, and it starts to bring in doubt to places that you didn't even have it before, and it gets complicated. right? And when I was kind of in this place of like, you know what, maybe I was, maybe I'll stop all this. I won't have a business. I won't teach the craft. I won't teach magic. I won't help people connect to nature. I'm not the one, I guess. That was where my head was at. It was a really hard time. I started getting the call for Apollo, from Apollo. Suddenly he was everywhere. He was being mentioned in podcast interviews I was listening to. I remember vividly, I was listening to The Friendship Onion with Dom Monahan and Billy Boyd from Lord of the Rings, Merry and Pippin. They had a podcast for a little while. It was very cute and sweet and definitely not witchy. But Stephen Colbert was on their show. I'm a huge fan of Stephen Colbert's. Huge fan. And it was like the episode I was looking forward to listening to a lot. And when it dropped, I listened to it. And even Stephen Colbert starts talking about Apollo and how Aragorn kind of represents this Apollonian ideal for what the divine masculine can be. Stephen Colbert, Catholic man, on a podcast. That's comedic. And I was like, okay, I can't. This is something else. And so I can back up a little bit. Apollo started calling me in small ways at first. And I live in Greece, so I have to really be careful because like if I see something called Apollo's this or that, he's a popular Greek god. We're in Greece. That makes sense. But like my Christian neighbor brought up to me about a temple of Apollo he felt strongly that he needed to tell me about so I could go visit it. I had another friend of mine talk about Apollo. I ended up meeting somebody, talking, hanging out. And then at the end, she's like, oh, by the way, like, do you work with any Greek gods? I work with Apollo. And it just felt like he was kind of making himself seen and known. And so I didn't do a ritual or anything. I didn't plan anything out. I didn't like have any big heart-to-hearts with, my spirit guide or anything. It just felt like something I was supposed to just pay attention to for a while. So it was very passive at first. And then I started getting the call to go to Italy. Now, I felt these things were separate. I didn't think of them as connected at all at this point. But I started getting the call to go to Italy. Again, same way, little dribs and drabs of information. The first thing was, I wish, you really need to write stuff down, everybody. I wish I did. I wish I wrote down, but you never know what's important till later anyway. But I remember, I don't know if it was the first thing or not, but I do remember when I was getting the call to go to Italy, it started with the nature. I think I saw a picture or video of a tree that was trimmed in a really different way. And it just spoke to me. And so I looked at where the picture was and it was in Rome. And so I just went online and I saw some flights to Rome and I had a lot of things going on and I only had time during like these few days. And I also only had budget for, certain things. Like I said, business was struggling. And sure enough, there's a direct flight at a good time. Everything's easy. It's going to be a piece of cake to go. That's another sign that spirit-led travel is going on because things open up and get possible very easily and quickly. And talked to my husband. He was able to go too. He actually was able to take off work. He was in a really good place. It was divine at every turn. And so we booked this flight. And then the Apollo things start ramping up again. I start getting, I'm never somebody who likes the sun. I know that must sound crazy. Living in Greece, it is hard to avoid, but I don't love it. I don't love direct sun on my skin. I feel really like, I don't know. I don't like it. It's too hot, especially here. The sun is way closer to the earth than Pennsylvania, where I grew up. So it's just a very different feeling on my body. And I just do not like it. But I started to feel the sun like in a gentler way. Like it was the same sun, but it started to feel different. So anyway, we get to Italy. The first place we go is the Vatican, actually, which, fun fact, the Vatican is a deeply pagan place. Deeply pagan. Every single thing in there is ours. It's ancient Greek statues. It's mosaics from Rome. It's pottery. It's curse tablets. It's ancient pagan history on steroids. It is incredible. Like, a friend of mine is a bit jaded against the Catholic Church, and she said, I will never go there, blah, blah. I said, yeah, but like it's pagan Disney World. And she was like, okay, you had me. So she went and she's like, you were right. There's no mention of Jesus anywhere. Honestly, I think Catholics should be a little more concerned with how much pagan imagery is going on in the Vatican. But we walk in, you have to buy tickets ahead of time, pro tip. And we walk in with our tickets, and the absolute first statue we see is a massive statue of Apollo. And it just, I knew at that moment, it all clicked that everything was working together. And so throughout that trip, I was able to visit different temples of Apollo. I was able to work with different energies of his in different ways. I also uncovered that Emperor Hadrian, this should be an episode too, famous people in history who worked with gods to change the world. Emperor Hadrian is definitely one of these. He was an Apollo devotee himself. He felt that his partner, his boyfriend, was an incarnation of Apollo on Earth. And in fact, when Antinous died, he became deified as well. So I understood what it meant to work with Apollo by the end of this trip. I understood how to reach out to him. And I felt like his energy had been revealed to me in such a clear, crystal clear way that when I got home, I started working with him more diligently. And the lessons he walked me through ended up helping me with my business in ways I couldn't have ever foreseen Apollo being the person to work. Like I never would have said, okay, I'm struggling. Let's Google which deity to work with. Oh, good, Apollo. The way he ended up helping me was through charisma, through putting my face out there, through feeling comfortable posting on social media to the masses of the public, feeling protected and held in that, despite, the craziness of that. It is crazy, the way we can be visible these days. It's unlike anything our ancestors could have ever dreamed of. And he helped me work through a lot of shadow and doubt with that. He ended up calling me back to Italy in June and of that same year. So April to June, I was in deep intensive with Apollo. And this was 2023. And in June, I go to Italy and we go to Pompeii. And in Pompeii is a whole big city. So there's lots to see. But one of the major places that most people will go to is the big square. And there's a temple of Apollo in there. And at the time, my business was still not picking up, I'll put it that way. And I'm walking around this temple and I just sort of say to him, like, look, if I'm supposed to keep doing this, if I'm actually supposed to be doing this, I need a sign. I need a sign right now. And I kind of gave it a little ultimatum. We've been working together a couple of months. I got a little sassy. I was like, right now. And I remember it so well because I put my hand on the wall and on the ground. Like I leaned down and was like squatting beneath, like at the altar where his temple altar would have been. And I was just like, anything, I just need a sign. And nothing happened. Nothing happened. I stood up, looked around, waited, ears pricked, hoping for this sign. I walk the rest of the way around the temple. As I step out of the temple, literally instantly, my phone goes off and I'd gotten my first patron on Patreon. And from that moment, I knew that Apollo delivers. I also knew that he can be sassy in return to sass. He gives what he is served. And I could not have learned those lessons so clearly, so visually, so memorably, so viscerally, if I hadn't had that experience with Apollo in Italy. And so that's why travel becomes so important. It becomes a way to really get to know yourself. It becomes a way to get to know the deity or the spirit that's calling you. And it really becomes a way to expand. Travel is unbelievably expansive. Unbelievably expansive. The person I was before I started traveling with intention, and that's another word for spirit-led travel, is intentional travel. I can't imagine traveling any other way now. even when it's, a friend's wedding or something like that, I let spirit lead me. I have a wedding coming up in November, and I'll be driving about an hour to get to it, but I'm going to leave, 5 hours early so that I can be led by spirit to do something fun along the way, because it's in an area I've never been before. So things like that, letting yourself be open to being guided on your journey is the key here. That's really, really the key to spirit-led travel, and letting yourself be open to the possibilities of what it can teach you, and acknowledging that it might continue when you get home, that the integration period is going to be where some of it makes the most sense. So it's a balance of not putting too much pressure on the experience, but allowing yourself to go with the flow and be guided by your intuition. Thank you for seeking Numina with me today. I look forward to welcoming you back onto the path of the sacred wild in our next episode. Have a beautiful, blessed day. Thank you for seeking Numina with me today. Join me at patreon.com/Elyse Wells to support this show and get access to a library of rituals, exclusive videos, meditations, and more. To learn more about my upcoming retreats, book a tarot reading, or learn with me in workshops, classes, or mentorship, visit seekingnumina.com.